Last night's GOP primary result out of New Hampshire went about as expected, with former President Trump meeting the expectations that the polls had set out for him. Nikki Haley coming in a close second place. And joining me now to discuss what we should make of these results is Anthony Scaramucci, the former White House Communications Director. Thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Wyatt, it's always good to see you.
You as well. I suppose I just want to start out with Donald Trump's. By all accounts, at least if Iowa and New Hampshire are any indication, it seems that he will be the nominee. New Hampshire was Nikki Haley's best chance, many people had speculated, and she came in. It was a close second, but she still was not able to pull out a victory. Where does her campaign go from here? Do you foresee her dropping out ahead of South Carolina, given that in South Carolina, Trump is likely to perform quite strongly? He has the endorsement of the governor. A lot of factors at play, I guess.
So it's a good question, and only Governor Haley knows the answer to that. And of course, if you had asked me, would Governor Ron DeSantis drop out prior to New Hampshire, I would have said no. So I would have gotten that wrong. He dropped out. I guess it would not surprise me if she drops out. One of the things that makes me think she stays in is she's a former governor there. She is popular. She has a lot of money. And I think she's really trying to make a case that she's a better alternative to Donald Trump. And so she's a fighter and a tenacious person. Why not make another battleground stand, if you will? And so I could see that happening as well. If you're asking me the broader question about what's the likely outcome of all this, Donald Trump will win the nomination. This is a great irony for the Republicans because he's probably the only Republican that the Republicans could nominate that can't beat Joe Biden. And so that's the great irony of the whole thing. And so, we'll have to see what happens. But I'll just point out to everybody listening, if you poll the non-Trump Republican voter, he doesn't have a lot of crossover. So Nikki Haley's people, they're saying, 43% of them say they will not vote for Donald Trump in the general election. That was the demise of Hillary Clinton back in 2016. She couldn't get the crossover vote from the Bernie Sanders voter over to her. Of course, Barack Obama got the crossover vote. People who voted for Hillary, 75% of them ended up voting for then Senator Obama. So I think Mr. Trump, the president, former president, he's going to have a hard time converting these people. And it's because of the nature of his personality. And so we'll see what happens. But I predict that he'll get the nomination, but lose the general election. And then, of course, you and I will be talking about his candidacy in 2028 if he can stay out of jail.
And I suppose I want to ask you too, because there was a number of people in the first term of the administration, yourself included, who have since spoken out about him, or I guess who have had, a semi kind of falling out with him. The relationship is not as strong as it used to be. People as well, like former chiefs of staff, of course, Mick Mulvaney and John Kelly, John Bolton, James Mattis. I mean, there's a whole host of people who held various positions within the administration. Even just today, for example, he was posting on Truth Social calling Kayleigh McEnany, his former White House press secretary, a rhino for comments she made on Fox News. I guess I'm just curious, is there any indication then as to what we could expect from a second Trump term, just given some of these comments he's making about people who were very loyal to him throughout the course of his administration?
But you see, the problem with Mr. Trump is that the loyalty only goes one way. It's asymmetrical loyalty. He's expecting unconditional loyalty from those people, and he's capricious in terms of how it relates to his own loyalty. Now, what's been a miracle for him is he's always been able to find people to join him on these crusades. And I'll just cite myself. I saw the wreckage of Mr. Trump's prior relationships. I thought, okay, I'll be okay. I jumped on the bandwagon. I ended up as part of the wreckage. I think that's the truth for Mattis, Tillerson. You pick the person. You left out one person, though, which I think is an important one to put in, and that's Mark Meadows. And so Mark Meadows is the former chief of staff. He is the principal witness, the chief star witness for the prosecution to the Department of Justice in the January 6th insurrection case. And so Mr. Meadows, he's not a democratically elected, Soros-funded DA. He is a white Christian Southerner who was part of the Freedom Caucus. In fact, he led the Freedom Caucus, staunch conservative, worked for Mr. Trump as chief of staff, and he's now testifying against him as a key witness. So So you have a tremendous amount of wreckage, and this is a very different country in 2024 than it was in 2020 or 2016. This is a beautiful, colorful mosaic of a country. Like a kaleidoscope, it's changed once again, and it's of different shades today than it was in the prior two times that Mr. Trump ran. And so if you had a trivia question posed, you said, well, who lost the popular vote twice, lost the incumbency of the presidency, and like Herbert Hoover, lost the House and the Senate at the same time? There's only one person that we could cite, and that's Donald Trump. And so, he doesn't have the strength of a broad electorate to win this thing. Moreover, I think if you're him last night, you've got to be concerned because it was almost 50-50. You'd say 50% of the supposed Republicans or moderate independents had no use for him. So it's going to be an interesting thing. But I predict a very sordid and bad outcome for him. And if he doesn't go to jail, we'll be dealing with him in 2028.
And he, during the first term, of course, had Mike Pence as his vice president, who, at least over the course of the administration, you mentioned loyalty, it kind of goes one way with him. But Mike Pence, almost many people comment on the fact he was like a rubber stamp, kind of would go along with whatever Donald Trump wanted. And obviously now, particularly amongst the pundits and in the media, there's a lot of conversation as to who will be his pick for a second term. First of all, what qualities do you think he's looking at? And who are some of the people, at least from what you know about him, that could be at the top of the list?
Well, it's definitely going to be loyalty over competence. It's going to be somebody that doesn't overshadow him. So when they talk about people like Nikki Haley, I would say absolutely no way. He doesn't want anybody in that position that has a strength of personality. And so it could be any of the sycophants that are riding behind him, like they were last night, or it could be a new or an old sycophant. We'll have to see. But my guess is that there's ample number of people. Remember, if he wins the presidency, there'll be an ample number of people that will want to join him in the office of the presidency. And so it won't be the same people. One of the criticisms will be these will probably be less people that are focused on the idea of America, and they'll be more focused on serving Mr. Trump. I think if you looked at people like Paul Ryan, Mattis, Kelly, McMaster, you pick the person. I think they looked at it as the institution of the presidency and somebody that was serving the American people and the country, not necessarily Donald Trump. And so when he was doing or saying things that were against the interests of the American people, those people stepped in and sort of slowed down his role and blocked him from doing certain things. One would have to question whether or not there'll be those types of people involved this time. So I don't know. We'll have to see. But, you're in a very splintered media environment, which is why you're so enjoyable because you try to play it right up the middle. But some of your folks are watching MSNBC. They think Trump's going to get trounced. And some of the folks are watching Fox News and they think Trump is going to be recrowned the winner in November. I'm not watching either of those. I'm just looking at the data. He doesn't have the data to support him getting through a general election. And it's a great irony because any of those other candidates, they were polling well ahead of Mr. Biden.
And just lastly here, before we conclude, because of course there's a number of different kind of factors at play as to what could influence a second term of a possible Trump administration. But as we head into the general election, because you have a lot of conversation specifically amongst people as to what that could look like. Of course, you had people like Vivek Ramaswamy and Tim Scott and Doug Burgum and now Ron DeSantis most recently, who were all in the race and then dropped out and endorsed him and are now united behind him. Many people speculating that's because they want some kind of a role in the administration in the case of someone like a Ramaswamy. But it seems as if all of the Republican Party is hesitant to speak out about him, despite a large number of these polls showing that he will lose in a head-to-head race with President Biden. What should the Republicans be focused on, though, to prevent that from happening? And I guess you kind of have to play it both ways, specifically for Republicans who are not a fan of Donald Trump. They don't want Joe Biden to win, but here they also don't want Donald Trump to win.
Yeah, well, listen, I think it's pretty simple. I think there's two litmus tests. The first one is, are you a patriot or not? Or are you an institutionalist and a believer in the American democracy or not? And I think that's just step one. And so I think I'm a patriot first. and a partisan second. So I'll be working for President Biden, even though I have been a lifelong Republican. Ultimately, I don't want to see the institutions of the American democracy, the separation of powers in our Constitution, besmirched by a potential president that's already said he would be dictator for a day. He would persecute the political adversaries that he has through an unbalanced Department of Justice. He has said that he wants to expand the executive powers of the presidency. So he's been very open and very vocal about that. He hasn't read the Constitution, and he is literally an orange wrecking ball that is threatening the Constitution's integrity. So for those reasons, step one is, are you a patriot or not? If you're a patriot, you've only got two choices. I'm for the preservation of the democracy. Step two, you're asking a really good question. There's no healing with Mr. Trump. You either see him for who he is, which is a criminal, and you see him for what he is, which is a miscreant who's going to do real damage to the country and a proto-autocrat, or you don't. You're blinded either by the media persuasion, the sort of funhouse mirrors at a place like Fox, or you're blinded by your own political ambition, somebody like Tim Scott as an example, and you don't see it for what it really is. And so that's okay. But that's why you got guys like me out here to hopefully explain it as carefully as possible to as many independents as possible. So there's no healing the Republican Party with Trump at the top of the ticket, because if you worked with him and you were inside the blast zone, you actually know how crazy he is, and you know how damaging he could be to the whole concept of the American experiment.
All right, we'll leave it there. Anthony Scaramucci, thanks so much.
Good to be on, brother.